came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Well, hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution and we teach the rising generation to be free. I'm glad you could join me. We have a very special episode going on today. As always, I'm going to point you over to the website, constitutionstudy.com, that you can find everything I'm doing on the Constitution Study. You can ask questions, you can get involved, you can share information. It's the best place to go to get more information about what's going on here. Now, today I said we have a very special episode. Today I'm inviting Paul Sorum from North Dakota. He's doing some interesting work that I've been helping out with, thankfully, back up in North Dakota. Paul, welcome to the Constitution Study, and would you kindly introduce yourself to our audience?
Oh, thank you. It's nice to be here, Paul. My name's Paul Sorum. I was a candidate for governor of North Dakota in 2012, and I've been an activist since that time, and I support other conservatives here in the state. I'm a constitutionalist, and I'm a student of the law. I'm not an attorney, just a normal citizen. And that's roughly my background by trade. I'm actually an architect. I'm a licensed architect and a builder. But I spend most of my time these days doing research for various legal cases, and I'm actually paid to do that. And they're always relating to oil and gas, because that's a huge industry in North Dakota, but they also relate to government and how the government works, how it doesn't work. And I find it fascinating. I'm fortunate to be able to do these things.
Well, great. I want to remind all of our viewers here, I know we've been spreading the word. I do love questions. So if you put your questions in the comment, we will try to answer them while we're on the program. We wanted this to be as interactive as possible. But I know, Paul, I was introduced to you specifically dealing with an issue involving law and constitution of the state of North Dakota and mail-in ballots. So why don't you give us a little bit of background on that?
Well, it's very interesting because you might have heard in North Dakota they didn't fully shut down our economy like in some states. However, the governor has issued actually quite a number of orders, and some of those orders, I believe, step over the line and they're unconstitutional and violate statute even. And one of them is an order the governor made to provide for a mail-in ballot only primary election. That's coming up next month on the 9th. And I've had a lot of people contact me saying, well, how can it be, that we can only mail in our ballot when, we can go to the grocery store, we can go to Walmart, we can go to a liquor store. Why can't we stand 6 feet apart and vote? And I said, well, you got a really good point. And they encouraged me to help them, a couple of candidates in particular. And I read through the order and I found, while the governor of North Dakota has a statute he relies on for emergencies, so he can take and suspend laws that have to do mainly with how the state does things. They call them regulatory statutes. What I learned is basically everything is a regulatory statute, so that wasn't going to prevent him from suspending election law. However, in suspending it, there is a provision that says, well, you can suspend laws if they impede the government's response to the emergency. And here's where we start to go off the track, because if we observe social distancing standards and we vote, I don't see how that impedes the government's response to an emergency. And then he goes on in his order to create laws and direct the county and the Secretary of State as to how to spend money for this mail-in ballot only, how to administer it, and he doesn't have any authority to do that. So when the governor creates laws and then directs people to follow them, you've got a constitutional crisis, and that's what we have right now.
So yeah, we have a mutual friend, someone who follows the Constitution study. I won't mention his name, not because I don't think he wants it mentioned, but I don't have his permission, and I'm trying to be as abundantly fair as possible. Uh,
Okay.
but he asked me to give you a call. I warned him. I said I'm not an expert on the Constitution of North Dakota, but I'd be more than happy to reach out and talk and maybe bounce some ideas around. And I don't know about you, but I thought we had a really interesting discussion revolving around the executive order um, and what the Constitution of the state of North Dakota says, what the laws of the state of North Dakota says, and what that all means in your attempt to deal with this I don't know if I call it breach of the public trust, but certainly this unconstitutional situation.
Well, since I ran for governor, I've become a student of the law because I saw so many things that I consider to be not just corrupt, but just very obvious, blatant violations of our state laws and our state constitution, U.S. Constitution. And what it usually boils down to is if a politician wants to violate your rights, they're going to start with your right to due process and equal protection. Those are what are always violated. And guess what? When you really look at how to enforce your rights to equal protection or due process, it's very, very difficult in our courts because our courts are broken. And those fundamental rights are very difficult to defend in court. And if you look at some of the other orders around this pandemic at a state level, you'll find that due process and equal protection, why is it some businesses are essential and some aren't? I don't know if you can do that. I think that's a special law. And is it a law? No, only the legislature can have laws. So there's a lot of fascinating things, and a lot of issues that people really need to, they need to be aware of.
You talk about the courts being dysfunctional. One of the parts that really chaps my hide is this idea of compelling government interest, and the fact that it's used by courts to not only say we can infringe on your rights if there's a compelling government interest, but they come up with these euphemistic terms for how hard the government has to work to prove that it's got a compelling government interest to infringe on your rights. Well, if you go back to the Declaration of Independence, the primary governmental interest, the most compelling governmental interest is to protect our rights, which
That's
they're
right.
using to say, let's infringe on our rights. So, and part of the reason, Paul, and I'm thankful that you joined me because, okay, we are dealing with North Dakota. You and I have been dealing with this. It's only been a little over a week, and we're two people. We don't have law degrees. We just have the ability to read and comprehend the English language. But these are the types of things that we should go through for the people in the other 50 states, the other 49 states, right? In the 50 states, to say, okay, if we think if something's wrong, what's the process that we follow? And can I learn something from what's going on in North Dakota that may be applied to where I live in Tennessee, or where people around the country who follow this? I'm getting more and more people talking to me, and they're concerned. What are we going to do? So you've prepared a demand letter for the governor of North Dakota, correct?
Right.
So talk us a little bit, just as a little background, right? So I talked to Paul. We were on the phone for about an hour and a half, I think. Yeah. And within that time of he and I on the phone and doing a little bit of research, all for free on the internet, we came up with several problems with the governor's executive order. And I'd kind of like to work through them one at a time and help explain them to the audience.
Yeah, so, we have a law in North Dakota that says the governor can suspend the provisions of any regulatory statute prescribing the procedures for conduct of state business. So an election is state business. Now, he can only do that, and the law goes on to say, if strict compliance with the provisions of any statute, order, rule, or regulations would in any way prevent, hinder, or delay necessary action in managing a disaster or emergency. And I say, our pandemic doesn't meet this criteria because, like I said, we can go shopping for groceries, we can go to the clinic, we can go to the liquor store, now we can go to bars, and whatever's considered essential is a little arbitrary, because if we can do those things, but we can't go to church, going to church is not essential, and now we can't vote in person, apparently that's not essential. I think we have some real problems, and this goes back to my argument of equal protection. And now when the governor uses this power in this pandemic, which was declared an emergency by the state and the president of the United States, he goes on to establish other rules and other laws and direct people. The Secretary of State is the only one who has the right to supervise the election, not the governor. And yet he goes on to direct the superintendent in his order. He says things like each county, let's say he suspends one statute about the time for processing and tabulation of ballots, that tabulation of processed ballots may not be done until 7 p.m. on election day is our normal law. But he says, no, we can start tabulating them days earlier. Well, he doesn't have power to make that. And you can just go through these orders and see if they're making new laws, they're out of bounds. They've crossed the line. He does that a lot.
Let's back up just a little bit. In reading the North Dakota Constitution, which entity is in charge of establishing the laws to administer the elections?
Oh, only the legislature. Yeah.
Okay, and that's not something we pulled out. That is actual the language, in fact, of the Constitution of the state of North Dakota.
Right.
Is that
right?
It is the legislature that does that.
Yes, that's right.
And we also have this interesting. I guess you and I have a bit of a disagreement, and there's another person we've talked to, and that's the question of the definition of a regulatory statute.
Right.
Now, the North Dakota Emergency Powers Act says that the governor has the power to suspend regulatory statutes, correct?
Yes.
So the question I have is, okay, well, what is the difference between a regulatory statute and any other statute? What makes it a regulatory statute?
Well,
now,
the strict meaning of the word is the regulatory statute has to do with the Administrative Practices Act for government agencies. And those are just rules they follow to operate the business of agencies, whether it's workforce safety or it could be, minerals management, or it could be any state agency. Those are their rules. Those are regulatory statutes.
So
in talking to different attorneys, they feel basically any statute could be regulatory.
Which is where I want to go back to. So the Free Legal Dictionary defines regulatory statute. Oh, I had it and I lost it. Where'd it go? Basically, like I said, it's the laws created by regulation. And the interesting thing is these are created in the executive branch, which under North Dakota law is what's called the administrative law.
Right.
So we have a legal definition that a regulations, a rule or order having the force of law, they're issued by various governments and departments, but they are they carry out the intention of the legislature.
Yes.
Now, okay, and that to me that's a very important point, because we're saying that the legislative branch, according to the Constitution, has the sole authority to write laws administering the election. but somehow that which is not created in the regulatory agencies is not a regulation. It is a statutory law created by your legislature, is somehow to be treated as a regulatory law. And
Yeah.
the fact that lawyers are saying this surprises me not at all, because
Yeah.
the plain language says it makes sense, right? So if you're the governor and you're dealing with an emergency and you say, you know what, this regulation that says you can only be you can only be open till 9 o'clock at night, or this regulation that says you have to have a license and your license expires in 30 days, they can suspend those. But to me, it's a leap to say we're going to counteract the legislature, which is the representatives of the people of North Dakota. We're going to
Right.
suspend that when the law says you only get to suspend regulatory. That truly bothers me, and I'm not surprised that lawyers are falling on the side of government power, but it bothers me that they do.
Well, you have to remember these things when you go into court, that attorneys, have a feeling that the law belongs to them and they know what to expect in court. And our judges are not there to support our constitutional rights, and they're not there to actually interpret the plain meaning of the language of these laws, which that one is very obvious, and I'll agree with you. But there's plenty of other unconstitutional things about these orders. So I went on and I said, okay, well, if you don't agree on what a regulatory statute is, look, he's writing laws. The executive branch doesn't write laws, and we shouldn't be forced to follow them. And oh, by the way, the governor is meddling in an election where his name's on the ballot. And I think very strongly that's a violation of our Corrupt Practices Act. And if he's violating Corrupt Practices Act, he can't be on the ballot.
So it would be like it would be like let's say Bill Belichick, goes to the Super Bowl with the New England Patriots and says, "Oh, by the way, I now have the power to change the rules."
Yeah, I'm going to move when we have the ball. We're going to move the field goal to the 50-yard line. I mean, that's the same thing, because a mail-in ballot only election, there's going to be more electoral fraud. Electoral fraud is going to be easier, and our Secretary of State has admitted as much.
Yeah, we can talk about that as we get a little farther. I do have a couple of questions or statements that have come in. The question about where's the legislative and judicial branch dealing with the governor and his overreach, and I typed in the answer, but it's worth mentioning here. They are part of the government, and they are more interested in protecting the government than in our rights or in the oath they took to support the Constitution, in your case, the state of North Dakota and of the United States.
Right.
And Scott Gallagher is right. This is not taught in high school. This is
No.
what we have to teach ourselves. And Scott, this is why I started the Constitution study, was to help people to read and understand it and realize that, yes, sometimes we get into some stuff that takes a little extra brain power and maybe some bouncing ideas around. But most of the stuff we're talking about is really simple. It's not that hard to understand. The lawyers and judges and politicians don't want us to. They want to hoard it. They want it to be in their control so that they can tell us how to live our lives. And
I would have to agree.
Yep. And one more thing came up here. So Joanne, she was asking the difference between a statutory law and a regulatory law. And I don't know if I'm using those terms entirely properly. To me, a statutory law is one that has gone through the legislative process. Right?
I would call it a legislative statute.
Right. Maybe it's a legislative. Like I said, I'm not sure. I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. But when we're talking about regulatory laws, we're talking about laws made from the regulatory agencies as opposed to those being made through the legislative process. So
Yeah, I would argue that the regulatory laws are all within one section of our, what we call the Century Code, and that's called the Administrative Agencies Practices Act. And they're just administrative rules, administrative remedies. Oh, if you go to job service and you have a complaint, they have rules how to deal with that. And that's the regulatory law and statute, but regulatory statute, in my opinion. But nonetheless, there's been plenty of other things here with this order that are highly problematic.
which I guess brings us to the next point I want to bring up, and that is you have highlighted three requirements under the law that the executive order Governor Burgum, I believe his name is correct.
Yes.
That Governor Burgum is attempting to suspend by executive order. Let's go through a couple of those just so people get an idea of what their governors may be doing or may try to do. One of them is a requirement that each county have at least one physical polling place open per precinct on election day.
Yeah, and he suspended that law. But like I said, how does voting, it doesn't satisfy his power here. How does voting in person, how does that in any way prevent, hinder, or delay necessary action in managing a disaster emergency? It doesn't.
No. And I don't know Governor Burgum. I obviously I don't live in North Dakota. I live in Tennessee. But I don't know if it's a question of, well, everybody's, a lot of people are saying this is something that should be done, and we'll follow along, or if there's some other motive to it. But the whole idea of we want social distancing. First of all, we're coming out of the social distancing and stay-at-home orders. And as you said at the beginning, if you can go to the grocery store, if you can go to Walmart, if you can go to the liquor store, why can't you show up and vote in person?
There's no reason, it's very hypocritical. And the idea that he's going to create laws and essentially act like royalty here is unacceptable. Now, one thing that you said early on is it was something I've said many times to people when I speak publicly, and that is the only legitimate function of government is to protect our rights by preventing injustice. And what we see at all levels of government is injustice inflicted on us. When politicians yield power, for some reason, they're interested in picking winners and losers. And that's what this is about, right? The grocery store is a winner. The church, you're a loser. Election, you're a loser. Liquor store, you're a winner, right? It doesn't make any sense.
I was on the Bella D'Angelo show a couple days ago, and we interviewed two people that own Betty's Pies up in North Dakota. And apparently quite an establishment. It looks like I may be going to North Dakota. I don't know if I'm going to be anywhere near there, but they have what sounds like some delicious pies. And we have some great food in North Dakota. Every town I know where the great food is, so you'll have to travel with me. Well, the point that was made is you're making a point of picking winners and losers. You're having people decide what is and is not essential. Well, guess what? Every business is essential to someone. There's at least one person, sometimes dozens, sometimes thousands of people to whom that business being open and providing an income is essential to them living their lives. We had the example in Dallas, Texas of Shelley Luther, who said it is not, she was confronted by a judge, and she told the judge, it's not selfish for me to be able to make money to feed my family and to allow the other hairdressers in my establishment to feed theirs. That's not selfish.
Yeah, but that judge doesn't understand the role of government. The function of government isn't to keep us safe. That's not their role.
He went to law school. And although I don't know for sure, I've yet to meet a lawyer when I asked them, did you study the Constitution in law school or constitutional law? they always tell me they studied constitutional law. So it's, so he's overruled or he's trying to suspend, and I say trying because you're trying to get him to stop, correct? You send him a demand letter, and I want to make sure we cover that before we wrap up. He's also suspending the rule or the law that says the counties have to let people know where this polling place is, because, well, if you're not going to have one. But then he also talks about the process of mail-in ballots, but at the county level. This I find interesting because in one part of the executive order, he says, well, I'm recommending the counties go to an all mail-in ballot. Then what does he go and he talks about require the county election boards to open and process mail-in ballots through is suspended. What's going? Explain to us how the mail-in ballot process is supposed to work in North Dakota.
Well, you can always get an absentee ballot, and you fill out a form and you send it to your county auditor, and they'll mail out an absentee ballot. But in this case,
who controls the process?
The county administers the whole election, and the county is supposed to have agreements with political subdivisions like school boards. I wrote an email to our county auditor. Hey, does the school board have an agreement with you on this mail-in ballot? No, they don't. Well, you're supposed to, and or a city or any political subdivision of the county has to have written agreements for this, and only the counties have the authority to administer the election, not the governor, but the governor is here giving the counties instructions on how to administer it, how to spend money. Now, think about this. What really happens in person in voting? All right, you go in the voting booth with your ballot, right? After you show them your ID, and they can see your ID and they can see your face and they know who you are then. They hand you a ballot when you tell them what precinct you're in, what your address is. You take the ballot, you go fill it out in the booth, and when you're done, you take it and you feed it in to the reader, right? No one touches it but you. Now, some of these, I read some notes from county commission meetings recently, and one county's got to hire a bunch of new people. Why? Well, because somebody has to open the envelopes. Now, if there's contamination, if I'm sick or if I'm exposed and there's coronavirus on the ballot that I put in my envelope and then I touch the envelope, someone has to touch the envelope, someone has to take it out, someone has to put it in the reader, and I'm saying, isn't there a lot more chances for contamination in a mail-in ballot? I think so. Am I wrong?
Well, certainly for the people processing the ballots, but there's a very interesting point, because in the North Dakota Constitution, when I read this, I loved it. The legislature is required to ensure, there's a couple of things they are required to ensure in the balloting, in the election process. One is that the ballots are secret, correct?
Right, yeah, that goes out the window.
And two, that that only eligible electors are allowed to vote.
Yes.
Now, how do you do that with a mail-in ballot?
I think you highly compromise those two things with the mail-in ballot. I really do.
We talked about this. You and I talked about this a great deal, because you have two fundamental problems. Problem number one is you cannot have a secret ballot because someone other than the voter has to touch the ballot. They have to be able to open it, look at it, and process it. That's problem number one. But okay, well, if it doesn't have your name on it, then I suppose technically it's anonymous, but then you're not sure that the person who's voting is actually eligible, because I could fill out a ballot, and I could fill out 12 ballots, 100 ballots, 1,000 ballots. I could send them to you, Paul, so they get a North Dakota postmark on them, and they don't know that I'm not an eligible voter. So you've failed that part of the Constitution. So you say, well, okay, what we'll do, what the governor and the Secretary of State said is, well, when you send in your request, they will mail you a ballot. Okay. Again, how do you know that the ballot that I'm returning is the one you actually sent me? The only way to do that is either put my name on it or a serial number. Voila, my ballot's not secret anymore. But we're back to, how do you know that I'm the person, or you, since I don't live in North
filled it
Dakota?
out.
You
The
don't.
county auditor doesn't know if you're the person who filled it out or who filled it out. It might have someone's name on it, but like for me, if I wanted to vote 3 times, I would get ballots for my 2 sons who probably aren't going to vote. And I would fill them out and put their information there, and I'd fill it out the way I want, and I'd send it in. And I have their, and put their electronic signature on or whatever. Who would know? Nobody.
Exactly. See,
I would never do that, by the way.
You described an in-person ballot, in the in-person balloting, what's referred to in the legal field as a chain of custody. You received,
Yes.
you identified yourself, you received the ballot, it remained within your custody until it was fed to the machine to be counted. There was a chain of custody of the ballot until it was counted. With a mail-in ballot, you have no chain of custody because it goes through dozens of hands as it goes from your mail carrier to the sorting to the trucking. It completely violates those 2 requirements of the North Dakota Constitution, that the ballots be secret and that only eligible people vote. Mail-in ballots violate that completely.
I agree.
I'm just looking to see if there's any, there's a little bit of conversation going on about what's going on in different states and stuff like that. Do we go back to paper ballots? It's paper ballots, machine ballots. Personally, I like paper ballots, and I'm a geek. I mean, I spent 30 years working in IT. I love gadgets. I love gizmos. I love the network. I love internet. But you're right. There's something fundamentally unhackable about showing up at a location, being handed a piece of paper, putting marks on that paper, then having that paper counted. It's just a pure way of doing it. And as much as I like technology, I've yet to see a technology I trust to do that.
Right.
So let's talk about, where are we time-wise? We're about halfway through. We're doing wonderful. Let's talk about, okay, so the governor issued this executive order. I believe he is blatantly violating the Constitution of North Dakota. I believe that whole thing about regulatory law is a canard. It's a way to obfuscate what's actually going on. But talk about what the Secretary of State did. And I believe this was by order of the governor, because the Secretary of State's a member of the executive branch. He works under the governor. Tell us what the Secretary of State did.
Well, we have this thing called Voter Vault, and it's just a record of who voted in the elections. And they maintain this over the years and update it. And then what the governor ordered him to do is find all the eligible voters. So he's taken updates from the Department of Motor Vehicles database, put it in the Voter Vault, and he sent everybody the form that you need to send to your county auditor to get your mail-in ballot. And some people are getting, these forms, these application forms for the mail-in ballot, they're getting dozens extra for a household where the house may have changed hands or people have passed away, children have moved away, and you're getting people getting multiple applications, and they have people's names on it. They have the names and addresses on them. And it really puts a lot of fear in people because they're wondering, wow, we're going to have people voting who are dead, who don't live in the state, who don't live in these addresses anymore. We have these applications going to people who aren't even U.S. citizens, and it really drives people crazy. I've heard from lots of people in the last couple of weeks and saying, "Hey, I got this for this person that used to live here. I bought the house from him 5 years ago, and they had a big family, and there's like 5 applications with their names on it." And I'm thinking, there's a problem now in our household. It's just my wife and I who are qualified electors. She got mailed an application, but I didn't. Right? Why? I don't know.
Which goes.
I've already sent mine in to get my ballot. I downloaded it off the website, but there are lots of irregularities. Yeah.
But it goes to show just how corrupted our voter registration systems are.
Well, wait. Now you just rose. In North Dakota, we don't have voter registration, but now we do, because you have to fill out this application with all your information on it. So that's another legal problem with this mail-in ballot only. When we fill out these applications and send them to our county auditor, we are registering to vote. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, but you said the Secretary of State has a voter vault, a list of names of people who have voted before?
Yes.
So you effectively, I mean, how, if you don't have registration, how does somebody know how does an election official know when someone shows up at the polls and says, I'm here to vote? How do they know they're an eligible voter?
You have to show an ID.
But an ID doesn't mean I'm eligible. Felons have IDs, and felons in most cases are not eligible to vote.
I'm not an expert on that aspect. That's a great question. But I do know you have to show a photo ID, and felons aren't allowed to vote. How they know that, I don't know. Do felons sometimes vote? I'm guessing probably they end up getting a vote once in a great while, yes. And in the mail-in, though, somebody recently asked our Secretary of State in an interview if that was going to happen, and he said, well, hopefully felons will know that they can't vote.
Oh, that makes me feel real good. So, and I want to make this point because it's really, 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 really important. Every ineligible voter who votes steals the vote of an eligible voter.
Yeah. Right.
And I don't care if you vote for the donkeys, if you vote for the elephants, if you vote for the unicorns, I don't care. Every ineligible voter who votes steals. It's theft. They steal the vote of an eligible voter. Now, people are already frustrated because they feel their vote doesn't matter. What happens when we find out, oh, by the way, yeah, not only does your vote not matter, but here's a 1 in 5, 1 in 10 chance that your vote won't count because it'll be countermanded, it'll be counteracted by an ineligible voter who got to vote. I mean, it keeps getting worse.
Well, you compound that in North Dakota, there's no transparency. In other words, in some states, after a vote, you can get all the ballots on a JPEG image, and you can sort through and count the votes and, just review what happened, not officially. You can't do that in North Dakota. There's no way to review and verify who got how many votes and what measures passed and what didn't. You just have to trust the powers that be and the canvassing board to do it. And so I think on top, I have a real distrust of our process in North Dakota to begin with. But then when the governor says it's going to be a mail-in ballot only, I'm thinking this has just become a joke. I mean,
yeah,
it's not a real election, frankly.
And of course, we all know that public officials and elected, they would never, ever manipulate the process to their own benefit. They would never do anything wrong. And just like we believe that felons would never show up to vote, people from out of state would never show up to vote. And for everybody and anybody who knows anybody who believes that nonsense, go to my website, constitutionstudy.com, look up the Battle of Athens, Tennessee. Because right after World War II, there was the veterans came home and they had to take up arms to defend their vote. It was being stolen by the political machine in the county. They had to take up arms in order to
Yes.
protect themselves from a corrupt voting process. And we're finding out, at least I'm finding out now in North Dakota, there's no protection of your vote.
No.
And why would anybody trust what the vote says? So
No, public trust is at a all-time low, I think, across the whole country, you know.
yes,
When you see people in government talking on video, on the internet, or on TV, you just sort of like, oh, well, they might be saying something that's halfway true, but we know it's not completely true, so forget it. You know,
well, you know how to tell when a politician is lying, right?
they're talking.
Their lips are moving, yes. Which
Yeah.
to me is as much as that says about politicians, it says even more about the American people that keep hiring these people. But
Yeah.
we got about 20 minutes left. I want to remind everybody who's watching, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to remind you, if you have any questions for Paul or for myself, please put them in the comments. I want to make sure we have time to answer them if they come up. I've been keeping an eye on it. But as we get going, Paul, tell us what you're doing and what your plans are to help fix this in North Dakota.
Well, I've been trying to fix the legal problems in North Dakota for a long time now, and
We'll
I'm going to
settle
keep going.
on this one.
On this one, I'm not sure. I guess it depends on if the governor responds. I don't think he will, but you know, then we need to start looking at our Corrupt Practices Act and asking that be enforced. I mean, the Attorney General never enforces the Corrupt Practices Act, and you know, we know that that's a big problem. It's hard to get a judge to act on it.
Is
But
the Attorney General an elected position in North Dakota, or is it an appointed position?
it is, yes, it is.
It's elected?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's good news. You've at least got a
Yeah.
way to deal with it. But
Yeah. Well, the problem is you have to find a licensed attorney to run, and that's where you get pushback. You know.
well, I
Like,
want to circle back to what do we do once you've had a chance of. So have you sent this demand letter to the governor yet?
yeah, it was sent by one of the statewide candidates. Actually, his only opponent in the Republican ticket in the primary sent it,
Okay.
and he put a deadline of Monday to get a response. If there is no response, then you know we could file a writ of mandamus, they call it. It's just you ask the judge to enforce the law. You know, the judge can do this extraordinary writ and demand that the person offending the law, follow the law. And I wish I had more, faith in that the courts would work, but I think that would be difficult. I think it would be a difficult path. I think it would be better to rally more people and either petition or do a rally, get public awareness out of this. The warning on this is that if the governor doesn't retract his order, his unconstitutional order, is that the results of this primary election will be invalid. And that's the truth. And that's the frightening thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I've answered your question. There are options. Obviously, going to court's one of them, but it's not the only one.
Yeah, because even a writ of mandamus it's a tricky tightrope to walk, because technically a writ of mandamus is a superior issuing an order to an inferior, and the governor is not inferior to the courts.
Yeah.
Right. That was a whole issue behind Marbury versus Madison. That was a whole. I learned about writs of mandamus when I researched the Supreme Court case Marbury versus Madison, and did the Supreme Court have the authority to order a member of the executive branch to do something? And they said, no, sorry. What he did is wrong, but we can't order him because we don't have authority over him. Right. But here's what I'm going to talk to, and I'm hoping a lot of people here are from North Dakota. And I did try to I did try to push this through North Dakota, because here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Certainly it would be worthwhile to contact probably the governor and maybe the Secretary of State, maybe the Attorney General. Paul, is this letter available for other people to copy and send around?
Yeah, they can just contact me on Facebook. Just go to query Paul Sorm and send me a message, and I can send them a copy.
Okay, because it's good information, and it's something you can use as a template to send. I
Yep.
also would recommend that each and every one of you contact your legislators, your representative and your senator, and make the point that the governor is usurping the power of the legislature to write law to administer elections. This is a usurpation of power. And I use that term specifically because it has this connotation of, it's not quite treason, but it really is serious. This is a usurpation of power. And, the question came up earlier, where's the legislature? Where's the judiciary? Well, the legislature is not going to do anything unless the people of the state kick them in the backside. Really get in their face and say, you represent us, you work for us, you act in our name. The power is being usurped. Get off of your tuchuses and demand a stop to this. I don't care if you have to turn around and say, we're going to defund the entire office of the governor for the rest of his term if he does not rescind this. I don't care if you decided to if the legislature says we're going to defund the entire executive branch. They're going to have to come. We defund everything. We're going to have to reauthorize everything because you have usurped your power. We are going to push back. I don't know the ins and outs of the Constitution of North Dakota, but if I spent about a half hour reading it, I could tell you that most of the power that the people delegate to the state goes to the legislature, and it's about time they stand up and do what they're supposed to do. So I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you three things. Right? One, get this letter, send it to the executive branch. Two, crawl up your representatives. Go to the reps, go to the senators, get in their face, demand that they not let the power you vested them with be usurped. Demand it. Don't ask them. Be polite, but demand it. This is the requirement of their oath. The governor swore an oath, he's violating it. The Secretary of State swore an oath, he's violating it. The Attorney General swore an oath, he's violating it. It is time to say, if you're going to violate your oath, we go to phase 3. And that is come November. And in fact, come the next 4 Novembers, 40 Novembers, however long you're on earth, when election day comes, remember this. Remember the people who ignored their oath to support the Constitution of their state and of the United States. Remember the people that ignored the rule of law and the people who did nothing about it, and hold them accountable. Every election, every time someone stands for election, that is a job review. They are coming to you saying, okay, here's what I did. I want my job back. And we should be turning around and saying, well, wait a second, you didn't do your job here. Why should I keep you on? This needs to be front and center in their face now, and they need to recognize that your vote in the next election will be swayed highly by how they react to this. And if they do the right thing, praise them, support them, help them. If they don't, then don't be bribed by some, oh, well, I supported this program and you like that. That's a bribe. Don't be bribed by it. If elections don't matter, if elections are not transparent, if they're not open, then they are not only is it that don't matter, they become dangerous. And we really need to take this as a wake-up call. And as much as I said this to the residents, the citizens of North Dakota, I want the citizens of the other 49 states to do the exact same thing. I want them to look at what's going on in their state regarding these mail-in ballots. I want them to get into the executive's face and remind them of their oath of office. I want their representatives protecting their powers. And if these people won't do it, they need to be fired. And that happens at election time.
I agree 100%.
Well, that's good. All right, let me see if we got any more questions. There was a question. No, HR 6666, the Trace Act. I actually have I have a video coming out on that. I'm not sure when. Looks like it's going to be closer to the end of the month. There's just been so much going on. So someone was actually about HR 6666 that I'm going to do at the end of the month. Let's say, I guess Daniel Hager, I believe that he was a delegate in 2012 and he voted for you. Well,
all right. Thank you, Daniel.
Let's see. The Joanne Levine, the reps that say they can't do anything, baloney. Baloney. All right. They don't want to do anything. It may be politically difficult for them to do anything, but they swore an oath to defend the Constitution of North Dakota, and it is being usurped by the governor. It is their job to either defund him or impeach him.
Well, here's what the governor is doing, Paul. The conservatives that would follow the Constitution their opponents are being funded by this governor. So he's become a boss, so to speak. It's a thug type tactic. And so a lot of legislators are being intimidated by this governor. At the same time, he's obstructing the election.
Well, then there are two things we do, and it's going to require work, folks. This isn't going to come on a silver platter, right? If the governor can dictate how your representative acts, you need a new representative. So, Joanne, I look at, and trust me, I've had not dissimilar discussions with representatives in my state. If you can't do anything, then you're unqualified for office, and I have to vote for someone else. And I have to help as many people as I can find in my district vote for someone else as well. We need to make the representatives more afraid of their constituents than they are of their political bosses. And the only way we do that is by stopping, getting bribed by, oh, I did this thing. I get an email every week from one of my U.S. senators, and it about makes me barf in my mouth. It's like, no, all these things you're saying, how great you did, they're all unconstitutional. You're just proving to me you're unqualified. And we need to stop playing footsies. We need to stop letting our representatives play footsie and say, oh, I can't do anything. Well, then you're useless. Get out of here and we'll find somebody who will. And yes, I get quite wound up about this stuff because this is my future. This is my daughter's future. This is all of our children's future is being decided in many cases right here and right now. And for those who say, well, I don't want to offend, then to me, you're no different than the rep that says there's nothing you can do. If this is what you want in North Dakota, at the Centennial, James Garfield said, and I'm paraphrasing, I can find it if I look, that if the Congress is evil and corrupt, it's because the people allow evil and corruption. If it is honest and good, it's because the people demand it. If your legislature in North Dakota is evil and corrupt and bowing to an illicit power, it's because you allow it. And it will only be good and honest and true when you demand it and will accept nothing else. I don't care if they're in session. I don't care if they're in session or not. They can call a special session. They can write the governor. They can make a stink. They can, they are not feckless, worthless, unempowered. They don't want to because there's a political price to pay. And right now, the political price of you being upset is not nearly as important to them as the political price of the governor. That needs to change.
I'll say it does.
Hang on. Oh, is that? I just saw a note about a hairdresser in Sumner. Kathy, that's yeah. We talked earlier today. You know, and you know, this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but it's an important point. All of these lockdown orders, all these shutdown orders, one, yeah, they're illegal, they're unconstitutional because they deprive you of liberty without due process of law. But we have to remember they all exist because we allowed the government to demand we get their permission to do business. You know, I'm as guilty as anybody else, right? I need to sell stuff to keep the Constitution study afloat. I need to collect sales tax in the state of Tennessee because I need to sell stuff. And to do that, I had to go to my county and get a business license. I had to ask their permission to start a business. I hated it, but I had to. But here's, you know, to the person who's to Kathy, to your friend who's afraid, I understand, and I do feel for them. You're put in a very difficult position. If she hasn't done some research on Shelley Luther, two things I'd suggest that your friend do. One is if she hasn't done some research on Shelley Luther, look it up. There's a great YouTube video of the interchange between her and the judge. And I think Shelley Luther, my description was, if Shelley was in one of my classes, I would have given her an A, because she basically told the judge, you tell me if enforcing a law is more important than feeding my children. But to get A+ in my class, I would have said, you tell me if it's more important to enforce an illegal, unconstitutional, immoral, and unjust law or feed my children. So, you know, that would be some information. The other is, and Kathy, I don't know if you know, we need to find ways to work together. The greatest strength the government has is in making us feel weak and separated. It is by working together and understanding, you know, standing next to your it's one thing to protect your own rights. It's something else to protect the rights of others. So to stand up and say, what are we doing here? We need to stand with the people who are afraid, help give them the strength, help them when they are attacked. If that means standing in front of a sheriff's deputy and saying, excuse me, officer, where's your warrant? Maybe that's what it takes. But the best thing we can do, and I haven't been talking about this as much as I really should, is you need to talk to your sheriff and make sure he or she understands the role of a sheriff in a constitutional republic. The sheriff does not work for the governor. The sheriff doesn't work for the state. The sheriff is elected by the people. He or she works for the people and is accountable only to their oath to support the laws and the constitution of the state and the county. So what you need is, we need constitutional sheriffs that will stand up for these people and say, I know you're afraid. I'm here. I will protect your rights. I will protect you. If my sheriff's deputies are not going to come and shut you down, and if the state troopers come for you, we'll stop them. We'll get in the way, because the sheriff outranks the state trooper in his or her county. Yes, Joanne, this will still be available on Facebook. It'll be, when I end the live stream, it'll still be there. Share it, please share it wherever you can. Paul, I kind of taken over for the last few minutes here.
That's okay.
But
I'm listening.
You know, I really do appreciate the opportunity to help you. I know it was kind of strange. You know, you get this phone call from this guy that someone says you should talk to, and you know, you didn't know who I was or what I was doing, but I think we've had a pretty good time the last week and a half.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate.
I was just going to say, back in 2012 when I ran for governor, I felt like I was fighting the corruption by myself, and now there are people like you and so many others here in North Dakota, especially, that are working together and see what's going on. It's actually quite a relief to see people like you and get calls from people like you.
Well, and it's been a pleasure working with you on this. I'm going to ask everybody that's watching, please share this. This is important information. Even if you don't live in North Dakota, there's a lot here that we can learn. There's a lot here we can use. Most of all, it's a dead horse, but I have to keep beating it, is we need to read and study the Constitution of the United States and of our state for ourselves. We need to know what our rights are. We need to be prepared to defend and assert them, and not just for ourselves, but for our neighbors. And as always, I love if you head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. If you can support the work that we're doing here, that would be wonderful. If I can help you, like I said, someone put me in contact with Paul and said, hey, he could probably use some of your help. And it turned out to be a wonderful thing. Whether it's helping you with an event or something like that, I will do whatever I can. It looks like we've kind of run out of questions, which is good because we're up on the hour. Paul, do you have any last words or anything you want to point people to before we sign this off?
Maybe if people want to call me, they can call anytime. Can I get my number? It's 701-219-5601. You can call me. I'd love to hear from you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I think this is a lot of fun. I know very often it's just me talking to a camera. It's been a lot of fun talking to a responding person with a video feed, not just some text typed. And, again, to everybody there, share this word. We are not alone. We are not, it really only takes a few people to realize it's not the first person that stands up. It's the person that joins them that really gets things going. So let's stand up. Let's protect our rights. Let's be willing to defend our rights. And I hope you found this great and enjoyed yourself. And I hope I'll see you again the next time on the Constitution Study. Thank you once again. And thank you, Paul, for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Came from a long through line of everyday